800 billion is over a 10-year period. It's from 2009 to 2019. My time horizon here is much shorter. It's 2009 to 2011. So that then gives me the final line, the amount in the final line, which is about $530 billion, about 67% of the amount that's in the legislation. So that's the net injection of aggregate demand, if you will, that comes from the Obama stimulus plan over the next 3 years. So once we figure that out, our next, the table here shows the breakdown of this total amount in terms of outlays and tax cuts. And outlays is split into two separate categories. The purchase of goods and services, which makes up about 22% of the total amount, and then transfers, which make up about an equivalent amount, and tax cuts, which actually make up for more than half of the stimulus plan. And this was, to start with, a big mistake on the part of the Obama administration. If you recall the discussions around that time, this was basically a concession to the blue dog Democrats and others who thought that tax cuts was the way to go and not spending. Because if you look at the original versions of the stimulus plan, which was floating around during the campaign time, it had a much more larger share towards expenditures. But this one was skewed more towards taxes, the final legislation. So the strategy in terms of figuring out the creation of new jobs from this spending, we use one method for figuring out the job creation impact of purchase of goods and services. And there we have to make an assumption about where this new final demand is going. That is, among which industries are they going to be distributed. And for that we use the US input-output table to figure out where this extra demand is going to go. And we do it under two assumptions. The first assumption reflects the current National Income and Accounting Convention, which sees general government as a producer of services, not as a mere consumer. And the second assumption is that most of this spending goes to the private sector as final demand for private industries. And that reflects actually the older National Income Accounting Convention, which views government only as a consumer. So then the question is about transfers and tax cuts. And there we make assumptions about the size of the multiplier associated with each type of tax cut, each type of transfer. And for this we use whatever the Congressional Budget Office is using. And they have medium values and high values of that. So we did the estimates under both those assumptions to get an idea of the range of these numbers, since there is a strong speculative element involved in this type of calculation, because what you're really doing is an ex-ante evaluation of the employment effect of fiscal policy. So we wanted to get a range of numbers. So basically the combination of assumptions and method produced 4 different scenarios. So the results are shown for all the 4 scenarios in this graph, and they are compared against the Congressional Budget Office estimates, that's the CBO, and the estimates of the administration, which is the Council of Economic Advisors, or the CEA. Now, in a kind of event which is unusual in economics empirical research, our assumption under medium, if you look at that, which is shown under the government case, the Levy is our estimates, is about 6.1 million jobs, which is very close to what the administration's estimate was. So we were very much on, which is very unusual because we're using very different methods. So we were happy about it. Anyway, that's the story. But the interesting thing to note here is that when compared against the job losses that has happened since the start of the recession till about last month, till January, you can see that's shown in the last bar, towards the right, towards my right, here at 7.8 million jobs have been lost. So it's a pretty sobering thought that the jobs that are created, that is likely to be created by the stimulus plan, mainly has a palliative effect rather than have a curative effect on the employment problem that we have. Now the prospects appear even bleaker when we add to, when we consider this in terms of the size of the reserve army of labor, or the employable pool that is out there. And it's about 15 million people who are unemployed by the conventional measure, the official definition of unemployment. But if you add to that the 9.4 million people who work part-time because of economic reasons, and about another 2.5 million people who have looked for work in the previous year, in the last year, but are not counted as part of the official unemployed. Then we get a size of the labor slack or the reserve army of labor that's out there. And you compare like the 6 million, or even if you take the higher end estimate of CBO, which is, or of our estimates, which is 8.8 million, then it appears pretty puny. So to the distributional aspect of the story now, once we have the estimates of the total amount of jobs created. Now, because this is estimated using the input-output metrics, we have a breakdown by very detailed industry and occupational groups as to where these jobs are going to come, right? So the next task is to blend that information or to incorporate that information into microdata. So our modeling strategy really involves combining input-output methods with methods of microsimulation. Now, to identify who gets these jobs, we estimate a labor supply response model, which is part parametric, part non-parametric. So the steps are listed here. I mean, the basic idea, I don't want to get into the technical details, we can talk about it if you're interested in the Q&A session, is to construct the employable pool or the reserve army of labor, and then basically determine through a variety of parametric and non-parametric methods who are likely to get these jobs. Now, the assumption here is that those jobs will be filled, which is a reasonable assumption, I think, because people will want to come and work given the situation of unemployment. Now, we assess the equity aspect of the job creation once we determine who are likely to get these jobs by asking whether it creates jobs for those hit hardest by the recession, and whether it creates jobs for groups who are, as a whole, considered as traditionally disadvantaged in the labor market. So the first criteria, that is, are the jobs going to those who are hit hardest by the recession, is something that we can do by comparing columns 2 and 3. That shows that job creation under the ARRA or under the stimulus will favor, or is likely to favor, women over men, non-whites over whites, and those who attended or graduated from college over the less educated. In contrast, the second criteria of equity, that is the job creation favoring those who are traditionally considered as disadvantaged in the labor market, that shows only that the job creation, that's a comparison between column 1 and column 3, indicates that the job creation would not favor women and non-whites as opposed to the first criteria. And both criteria is relevant, I think, in terms of assessing equity. Now, the picture is bleak by either criteria for those without a college degree. If you look at the numbers, they made up about 70% of the total employment at the start of recession in December, the numbers under column December 2007. And they accounted for almost all of the job losses when you take the situation as of November 2009. In fact, the level of employment for college graduates in November 2009 was higher than it was at the start of recession. But if you look at their share in terms of the new jobs that are likely to be created under ARRA, that's only around 60%. So that's a serious problem. Now, once we figure out who gets the jobs, the model then runs ahead to determine what the earnings will be and what the resulting household income will be. That again, is a variety of statistical modeling that we use to figure this out, and we can get into the details again in the Q&A in the interest of time. You can see the placard, the card there. I just missed those steps. But the key thing here is to, I want to bring your attention to is the result. As Ed pointed out, as was clear from Ed's slides, there was a decline in median household income during 2000s. Compared to the 1999 level, which was really the peak of the series from 1967 to now, at about like $52,600 in 1999. The 2008 median household income, as you can see, has dropped substantially by about 3.5% from its 2007 level. Now, what our simulations suggest is that the ARRA might have kind of ameliorated the crushing blow that was being delivered to the middle class somewhat.